I'd like to talk a little bit about my piece here in the show, and in doing so, maybe give you a little insight into the way I work, how a piece evolves. I almost always start with what I call a remnant. Sometimes it's a found object, sometimes it's a piece left over from another project. Sometimes it's something that I find on the street or in a dumpster. In this case, the piece, the wooden element, the vertical wooden element, started out from another project. I was doing a number of these small pyramids that were veneered, and the veneer, the grain on the veneer sort of wrapped around the piece, these four-sided pyramids. In order to get that piece, I started with layers of what are called MDF, medium density fiberboard. It's a plywood kind of product that you can get at Home Depot. Comes in 4x8 sheets, various thicknesses. In this case, it was 3/4 of an inch thick, and I had long strips of it that I had cut and glued together, laminated together, and the glue lines showed up as these marks across the material. I thought that was interesting, and I had a number of these to make, so I had a long billet, if you will, and then I proceeded with jigs to cut these angles on the table saw. Left over between these finished pieces were scraps, and they looked like this, geometric forms that I was about to throw into the scrap heap, but I resisted that temptation. The layers, the form interested me to begin with, but also the layers that wound their way around the form was very interesting. I ended up taking one of these and lacquering it, which highlighted the layers. I really liked that, and I thought, gee, I wonder how that would look on a larger expanse. And so I took some pieces of MDF, medium density fiberboard, cut them into 1-inch thick layers, rotated them so that the edge showed, and glued them together. And originally this vertical form here went all the way down. I felt compositionally I needed to do something with that, and so I cut it at an angle, took what was left here, folded it over so that the form resulted in this angle, and glued it back together, carefully trying to line up these points. It seemed to need something else, and so I had this found object, which I think was some sort of a grill work, perhaps left over from an old refrigerator or something, and I backed it with some wood and used acrylic to paint it blue and fastened that on there. The title of this work is Half Pigeon, and half pigeon is a yoga pose that I was in a yoga class, and the instructor put us in this half pigeon pose. One lays horizontally on the floor with one leg folded up underneath, kind of like that, but much further up, and arms outstretched overhead and forehead on the floor or on the mat. And I was in that pose during a yoga session, and it occurred to me that this must be how this sculpture that I was working on felt, with the one leg folded up underneath, the arms stretched overhead, and it seemed like the perfect title. This piece is called Meanderer, and it's made out of a number of pieces of laminated wood. the process of laminating is you take thin layers, each of which is able to bend around a given form, spread them with glue, clamp them around the form, and when the glue dries, you take it off the form and it retains the shape. The piece here was made from a number of different shapes, each of which were similar to this, single plane bends, if you will. And they were pieced together to form this organic ribbon which flows around space and creates the finished piece. I had a number of these pieces left from an old sculpture that I did 40 years ago. It was a freestanding piece and it had a number of these laminated pieces together. It was freestanding and it was unfortunately subjected to a water break in the gallery where I was displaying it, which discolored the form and basically rendered it other than what I had intended. So I ended up, after trying to store the piece a number of years, it was taking too much room, so I took it to the bandsaw and cut it into pieces. But I hesitated again the urge to discard it completely. So I saved it for a few years, and one day I started placing these around the floor in a different configuration, and then did the joinery on the pieces to attach them together, and this is what resulted.